Welcome to Build. I am your host, Matt Forte, and we're coming to you live from Build Studio in New York City, where I am joined by a packed house of some very, very excited fans and friends. And I get it. You see, our next guest is the incredibly talented, inspirational, objectively beautiful man, Justin Baldoni is here. How about that? Huh? Just a handsome dude. But we're... but so much more than that. We're very excited. Real quick, though, for those of you who can't be here but are watching this live, I've got some exciting news. You can ask Justin a question. It's easy. Just press the button on our site. It says Submit a Question. It's right over there. Or you can hit us up on Twitter at BuildSeriesNYC. If it's good, and I mean really good, we just might ask it live on the show, all right? Let's do this. Justin is best known for his character Rafael on the phenomenal, award-winning CW original Jane the Virgin. But if you've been following him off camera as well, then you know he's been working tirelessly for quite some time now to use his platform as a successful actor and creator to affect actual positive change. His latest endeavor is the new conversation series, Man Enough. As creator and executive producer, Justin hosts and moderates an intimate dinner conversation exploring the heart of traditional masculinity in America. Some of his guests include Derek Huff, Javier Munoz, and Bassem Youssef, just to name a few. Man Enough invites all men to challenge the unwritten rules of traditional masculinity and doesn't ask if, but rather affirms you are man enough. I believe we have a video. Let's go ahead and run that clip.
What is happening?
I promise I'm not standing you up. Emily, will you marry me?
It's the boy.
Everyone kind of looks at me and they think I'm so put together.
And I'm like, of course I'm going through problems. Like, that's why we're here. I'm on this journey to figure out what the hell does it mean to be a man. I have no idea what it means to be a man.
It's almost as if somehow the sharing diminishes you as a man.
I don't want to talk about certain things sometimes because I want to be the strong person in the family.
Yeah,
where,
right?
If you worry that you will not be able to provide, to do your role, this is my biggest scare.
We want to be hard. We want to be impervious. Nothing should ever get in. That is not human.
We have confused vulnerability for weakness when it's the strongest space that we can be in.
And if you're weak, you're not enough of a man.
Man enough.
Have you?
Man up. Be a man. Oh, bullshit.
I think we have like an age-old conversation there about how we view our women, and that's a big root of how we then define ourselves as men.
But that is something that's so common, and no one talks about it.
Because ultimately, masculinity, femininity, it's about being who you are.
That is my strength and power. I'm standing in my truth.
Don't leave the good parts out.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, Justin Baldoni. Give us some up. Give us some up. Thank you so much for carving out some time and hanging out with us here on Build and being here on the show. We've got so much to talk about. I really want to get deep into this, but the first thing I genuinely want to ask, how are you doing, man? How are you?
Thank you for asking me, actually. I'm good, man. I'm really good. I'll be honest. I've been struggling recently because things are getting so busy, and I'm trying to just figure out how I can maintain and build and jump into these cool opportunities and also be present as a husband and a father. So when people ask me genuinely how I'm doing, I try to be real. Because we all just like, oh, we're great. That's awesome. Moving on to the next question.
Yeah, things are good. Things are good.
But I'm really interested, especially at this point in my life, of like going deeper. Yeah. And like, you know, we're all good. You can look on Instagram. Everybody's happy. Nobody's depressed. Everybody's on vacation all the time, right? But the reality is, like, I'm really good, but I definitely am asking some big questions. Like, you know, I got a little boy and a little girl. How are you?
Me?
Yeah.
First of all,
how are you, man?
First time I've ever gotten a ping-ponged right back. That doesn't happen often. I'm doing very well. It's funny. I was actually, if we're going to be honest and be deep, let's stick with the spirit here, man.
Yes.
I was watching some of this show last night in preparation for today, and I was getting a little overwhelmed because I was intimidated. I was intimidated by the depth of the conversation, by the openness, the honesty. And I was watching. My wife comes in the room. I must have had this look on my face. She was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "I don't know if I got to figure this out. I don't know what I'm gonna do." And she was like, "Well, what's the matter?" And I told her the same thing I just told you. I feel a little out of my depth. And she goes, "You know what you should do?" And I was like, "No, look at me." And she goes, "You should tell him that." I said, "Tell him that." She goes, "The whole point of this thing is to be open, to be honest, to be vulnerable, expose yourself. Let him know that it worked, that you're sitting here and—
Bring it in, buddy.
Oh, my God. Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Can I, so one, thank you for that. Two, you smell incredible. Can I just, since just happened,
Isn't it amazing? Look. Do you see? Hold on. I just want to make it clear. We're two men talking about this right now. Thank you for saying I smell incredible. You smelled good as well.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
It's a love fest. By the way, I love that your wife told you to do that. That's fantastic, and I love that you listened.
Well, yeah, we have a very, my wife and I, we've been married for 1.5 years, but we've been together for going on 10 years. And so we have a very strong, special bond. And there is an openness and honesty that I don't know, that we kind of acknowledge. Not everybody finds necessarily right away. Some people don't know if they find it, but we are very lucky and very appreciative of what we do have together. But suddenly this has become about me and my wife. And while I could talk about that all day, I do want to get in a little bit to this show and you. Before we dive into this, I do want to get a little deeper into you. As I said earlier in the introduction, you have tirelessly worked to not just create content, but create content with purpose, to spark change, to be a positive voice out there. Can you identify how early on you decided that's who you were and what you wanted to do? That was your mission? Like, when did that sense of social responsibility hit you?
That's a great question. So I was raised in the Baha'i faith, and not to make this about religion, but I think it's important that we all have our perspective based on how we were raised. And for me, a key part of my faith is figuring out what your individual contribution to the betterment of society is, whatever that is. So you could drive a garbage truck. You could be a janitor. You could be a stockbroker. You could be a host. You could be an entrepreneur. Whatever that is, I believe that God has given every single human on this planet a unique ability to change it. And it comes down to just picking your path. So how am I going to be of service? And that was kind of ingrained in me from my mom at a very young age, and also from my dad. And so whatever it was that I was going to choose, I always had that, well, how am I going to help? How am I going to be of service? My very first job, I was a DJ at a radio station when I was 16. I did the overnight shift. So I was doing double duty. Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday afternoons I was working.
Did you have like a DJ voice? Did you?
Oh my God, it was so funny. I recently found the tapes, and I listened back to my 16, 17-year-old self, and I would go like really high. It would be like, my name was Just in Case on the radio.
Oh, I love it.
Like, it was like, all of today's best music, just in case. It was like one of those kind of things, and you're like,
oh, that's amazing. That is amazing.
Oh, I felt so bad for the people that listened to me. But I remember being on the radio, and Aaliyah died. Aaliyah died in the plane crash. And I was on the radio when I found out, and I remember stopping the music, and it was the first time that I felt like I needed to, I was in a position at like 16 where I was like, you know what? Because I was playing her music, it was a top 40 station. And so I stopped the music, and I remember I said a prayer for her live on the air. And, 7 people were listening, and nobody complained. But I remember that feeling of like, oh, wait, I can do this. Like this is something that I want to do. And I think that kind of stayed with me, and I fell into acting and then directing, and now I'm back in acting, and I'm still trying.
There was, so I watched your TED Talk, and there was a great little funny bit in the beginning where you kind of go through your cavalcade of previous characters, and you've got like
the greatest television role models ever.
Oh, exactly. You've got like shirtless male escort. You've got the shirtless date rapist. You've got the shirtless druggie con man. All these different things. Now, hang on. Now, all the hits. I bring those up because as you were getting casted in these less than desirable, anti-role model characters, yes, you're an actor. No, that's not who you are. But if that's all you're given the opportunity to play, if that's all the world perceives you as, was there a concern of the effectiveness with which you'd be able to get your message out there and be that positive voice if all Hollywood was ever giving you a chance to be was shirtless guy with knife in alley?
Knife and date rape,
Yeah,
drugs.
exactly.
and
It's
things.
these terrible
Yeah,
people.
It was so funny because I couldn't have been farther, of course, from those characters, I'd never even had a drink in my life yet. I was playing these characters that were drugging women. But I think it's easy in Hollywood to fit into you get stuck in the box. I mean, as men, we get stuck in the man box. And in Hollywood, you get stuck in whatever box. It's like, oh, you look like this, so therefore that's who you are. Yeah. And then oftentimes you can't get out of it. And if you are an ethnicity or a minority, then generally you're just stuck there forever. Luckily, things are changing now, and we're casting much more inclusively. But I got really lucky because I was directing music videos and little commercials on the side, and I kind of was feeling stuck as an actor, and so I ended up leaving, partly because nobody wanted to cast me anymore. Yeah. And I was able to kind of segue into the My Last Days documentaries and the telling the stories of the dying to inspire the living, and and started my company Wayfair, and some of these other things, and that's where I found my purpose. And then, of course, once I found my purpose, acting came back. And I think that's kind of you have to let it go. It comes back. And then I was able to, of course, find myself on a feminist show, playing a character that, had the stereotypical tropes, that a lot of the same characters I played had, but was written by a woman so that he had a different depth. And he was going to go on a journey over the course of the show. And it's been a really fun character to play. So I got really lucky, divine intervention, whatever you want to call it. I think that when you put your heart into something and you have a pure intention of what you want to do with it, I think things generally tend to work out, and yeah.
To that end, how did the infamous TED Talk come about? I think it was October last year, something like that. Because there's a lot of great stuff in there, and I always wonder what the journey is that leads to that moment where now you're on, say, almost in a professorial capacity, just like speaking about this.
So being fully honest, I had no plans to do a TED Talk. It was something that was on my my bucket list of one day. One day I'll write a book, one day I'll do a TED Talk, one day after I gain a lot more knowledge, because I'm not an expert at anything except asking questions about myself. And who wants to hear a TED Talk about that?
Evidently over 1 million people.
Well, so what ended up happening was I created this show over 3 years ago. And this year, in 2017, my company decided to go all in and to do it ourselves. We weren't going to wait for a network or a studio to fund it. We just believed that it was time. And I was asking all these questions, and I was getting such great feedback from my social media. And it just seemed like it was time to start asking these conversations publicly about what does it mean to be a man today? How can men empower women? How can men start to talk? And what ended up happening was we went and made the show. And out of the blue, Ted emailed me. They don't just call anymore.
I was about to ask, is it actually like
hello,
a
Ted?
dude named
No.
Ted? Yeah,
no.
This is Ted.
So I had a friend. I had a friend named Mina who works at TED, and evidently she brought up my name in passing, and there was an interest, and they randomly emailed me, and I had probably a month and a half to figure it out. And the challenge was that the TED Talk was basically 2 weeks after my wife was due with our second baby, who we then found out was a son. So there was this feeling of birthing both the show, it was like the birth of this TED Talk and the birth of my son. And it was interesting that I was having a son because all I was thinking about was masculinity and how I can be a better father and how I can kind of take everything I'm learning and help my son not have to suffer in the same ways that I have, in the same way that my dad did with me. We always want to be better than our dads, and then we were. So it was all happening at the same time. I was shooting Jane the Virgin, and it was just, at one point I had written a 7,000 word speech, which they said, that's crazy, TED Talks are 12 minutes long, this is 70. And because I'd never written anything like this before. So it was a really interesting process. I almost quit multiple times. I was absolutely terrified. The biggest thing for me was that I'm not a scholar. I'm not an expert. I don't I didn't believe that people would have any interest in hearing me talk for 18 minutes about anything. So I had to get through a lot of my own vulnerability, like my own insecurities and vulnerabilities. I mean, you're up on a stage, you memorize a talk, and you know millions of people could watch it. The last thing you want to be is the guy that screwed that up or ruined things for all male feminists,
pressure.
or you know.
And
and yeah, so it was a terrifying experience. But I'll tell you, I prayed a lot, and the response for the most part, I think, has been kind. And I hope that it did something, or it continues to do something. And
well, yeah, it's an incredibly moving talk, and it really does. It gets me curious about, because now you mentioned your 10-day-old at the time son in the talk, which is pretty incredible. And I'm wondering what that experience is like. Like, is this sense in your head of like, all my training has prepared me for this moment, like where you don't want you have such an ideal in your head of like how to prepare your child for the world. And so in your head, you've already been learning and asking all these questions. Now it arrives. Now it's a reality. How much of that goes out the window and you're learning in the moment? And
all of it.
All of it, yeah.
That's the thing, is I think that I always fear, and again, I want to say this as a caveat, this is not saying that these people are bad parents, but I always fear when people tell me they're ready to have a child. Like, oh yeah, I'm ready. You're ready to devote the rest of your entire life to one person and have this person grow up to contribute to society and is going to be better than you, and you're not going to... No, I don't think we're ever ready to have it. I think it's, it's not buying a car, it's not picking a house, it's like, it's creating a human that hopefully you don't screw up, and guess what? You're going to screw up the human because you're screwed up.
Exactly.
So for me, as much as my preparation... truthfully, my preparation has been trying to shed my mask of masculinity. It's trying to say, like, hey, son, when I can talk to him, your dad is not perfect. Don't make me a superhero. I'm going to mess up. And letting him know when I'm struggling, letting him know when I'm emotional, letting him know when I'm angry. Oh, I'm just angry right now. This is about me. It's not about, instead of hiding it. And look, my dad's actually here with me.
I thought that was,
yeah.
yeah.
My dad, I love him. He's one of my best friends. And we talk about this in Man Enough, that he never showed me when he was struggling. So I grew up thinking he was impervious. I grew up thinking he was Superman, right? And then you reach a certain age where you realize your parents are not superhuman.
They become human.
They're human.
Yeah.
And that's a crisis for all of us. I mean, I think we've all experienced it. When you realize your parents, like, could actually... get hurt in a car accident, or fall down and scrape their knee, or break their hip, or maybe not be able to afford their mortgage. Like, that stuff, this is real stuff. And we don't think about that. We think as parents so often that we have to protect and shield our children from it. And that's what my dad did for me. And I remember I told my dad in the first episode of the show at the end, I was like, man, I wish you would have told me these things. Because I think it could have saved me a lot of pain. And I could have seen how you handled it. Because when you grow up thinking your parents are perfect, then when you're confronted with problems, you think there's something wrong with you. Yeah. You think, oh, wait, my parents never dealt with, is there something wrong with me? And so for me, it's important. What I'm trying to do, and the conscious parenting that my wife and I are going to practice and screw up, is very much like, your parents aren't perfect, but we're trying. And this is what we're learning. Right. And this is what we're dealing with. And this is what we're struggling with, so that they know that their parents struggled. So when they approach speed bumps, they know that they can get through it because their parents did. Right.
Well, let me ask you this, and I don't expect there to be an actual answer to it, but have you guys discussed whether or not there's a point, like, do you start that from day one, or are you preserving childhood innocence to a degree for a certain amount of time, or you're going to feel it out?
That's a good question. No, we're starting it now. I know that if Emily and I ever get into an argument in front of Maya, we explain what it is, and I think that there's not quite a comprehension, but I believe that children can understand a lot more than we think they can. And I believe that, if mommy and daddy are, not yelling, but arguing with passion at each other, then it's important to, if Emily gets upset about something, she's very good about saying, sweetheart, this isn't about you, and letting her know what she's experiencing and feeling. And I think that we vastly underestimate what our children understand, just like I believe, we'll shift to Man Enough, we vastly underestimate the potential and the capacity of the men in this country and around the world, and that we can handle more than what we think and what we've been told. So yeah, we are starting now. We're starting early, and I think that'll just kind of progress. We don't have a game plan. We're not like experts at it. Who is it?
I didn't mean to grill you on your parenthood plan, and bro. there's something about just I enjoy a conversation with you. You're very, I feel very comfortable around you. I think.
Thank
it's the
you. I
aroma.
appreciate that.
So
it's the aroma.
But let's pivot. Let's talk a little bit about Man Enough before we open it up to the audience. I do want to talk to you about this amazing show. So you said you developed. Did you say 3 years ago? You guys had the idea.
Almost 4.
Walk me through the process that led to that development, because there is, again, not to go back to the TED Talk, but that story about the one guy you confronted on Instagram, you had a real conversation with, and you got to see a change in an individual. And I was like, is that like the Batman Begins moment? Was that the aha moment that I could do this and that I could change multiple people? So all of that, was it? How did this come to be?
It started. I think it started with me in elementary and middle school, and kind of being I remember being bullied, constantly feeling like I wasn't enough, feeling like I wasn't one of the guys, just always trying to win the acceptance of the other boys, and feeling kind of an outsider. We moved from LA to Oregon when I was 10. And it was a very small town, 10 kids in a class. It was just a very different world for me. All those boys' dads, they were hunters and fishermen, and they rode track, the four-wheelers, and I was a soccer player from LA. It was a very different world for me, and I just remember not feeling like I was a man. And that was kind of my first kind of crisis of masculinity, before I even really knew what it was just constantly wanting to be liked, wanting to be accepted, trying too hard, and being aware that I was trying so hard. So from that point on, I kind of built my identity of what a man was based on what would allow me to be liked, both from men and women. And I never felt like I was me. And I think that that's another reason why I had a hard time in middle school and high school, was because I was just trying to mold into what everybody else was. The reality of it is, if I were to ask everybody if they have anxiety about fitting in, the chances would be that every single one of you would raise your hands and say yes. And if men and boys were honest, they probably would do the same thing. So if everybody's trying to fit in, then who's deciding who fits in? Only a couple people that are kind of the alphas or the leaders. And I was never that. And if I was that, I was kind of told I shouldn't be, and extricated and made to feel like I wasn't good enough. So growing up, I was an athlete, but I loved drama. I played sports, but and I tried to hang out with the guys, but I spent hours on the phone talking to the girls in my class. And I was kind of an ugly duckling. I had, things didn't grow in proportion, trust me.
We're gonna need to see photos, because nobody here believes
I got
that.
him.
I'm gonna tell you right now.
Oh, no. I got him. My dad just showed me.
Here.
My dad,
your dad is here. I'm sure he's got him with him.
Look, things grew at different rates. Nothing just grows together. I promise you. I never could get the girl. I was always in the friend zone. But I loved my girlfriends because I could talk to them, and I couldn't do that with men. And I realized as I got older that I was a mix of both. I was a mix of masculine and I was a mix of feminine, and there was nothing wrong with that. But I was made to constantly feel like I was a sissy. What do men do how do men police each other on the playground, right? Oh, you're gay, as if that's being less of a man. Or you're this. Or you're a girl, as if being a girl is associated with being weak. This stuff is ingrained in us since we were children. And when I started thinking about it, I went, why isn't anyone young talking about this? Like, this is the other side. Like, we're the ones that created this problem for each other. We have to dive in and fix it. And so in the creation of Man Enough, I think it's really important. We're not trying to say that men are bad or that anything is wrong with men, or even that masculinity is toxic. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is it's about damn time we start asking questions, because not every guy is a alpha male, super tough, that can lift his body weight plus, whatever, and gets the girl and drives off on, into the sunset in the truck. Not all of us are like that. Like, we're all different, just like every woman is different. But it's almost like we've created this impossible standard that you have to be this way or you're not a man. And I didn't feel comfortable in that anymore, and I wanted to ask the question. I don't want my son to have to deal with that. So that's really how Man Enough came to be.
How do you go about, for lack of a better term, casting your panel, your table, all the guests you have? Because you have incredible individuals, incredible men that you guys are sitting down, and that is what makes it such a fascinating conversation to sit in on and listen in on, is that there's no preachiness to it. There is no bashing or anything like that. It's just an open, honest conversation about things that we're all thinking all the time, but for some reason not discussing. Yeah. So how do you find the individuals that are perfect for that conversation?
Well, we were trying to create a show that reflects America. And of course, because we're doing it ourselves, you know, for the first few episodes, we do need the flashiness of celebrity. But, you know, we went to our partners at Harry's who made this all possible. And we started to figure out, like, you know, what are the different intersections of men that we want to have at the table that could represent the voices of America. And it was a big challenge because not a lot of men are comfortable having this conversation in public. It's a very vulnerable conversation, as you and I are, which, by the way, we're doing it right now.
I'm enjoying it very much.
But I think it was important, you know, to make sure that different skin tones were represented, that different backgrounds were represented, that men from different places, you know, as an example, Javier, who played Hamilton up until the other night, grew up here in New York, Puerto Rican, gay, HIV positive. One of the most inspiring guys you'll ever meet in your entire life. That's a voice that you haven't heard talk about masculinity that often. And then you have really interesting guys like Prince EA, who's a spoken word former rapper from Facebook. Matt McGorry, who's an outspoken intersectional feminist, who's just a gem of a human being. And Derek Huff, a ballroom dancer. You know, Bassem Youssef, the Jon Stewart of Egypt. You have these really interesting guys. And then Anderson Silva, talking about body image and his insecurities, right? Yeah. And the first, and Aiden Dowling, the first trans fitness model that was on the cover of Men's Health. We try to find interesting men that reflect all these different voices because the point of the show is to learn. Yeah. We're not saying that we have the answer to the broken, you know, masculinity. What we're saying is, like, let's ask the questions, and what does it mean to you, and what does it mean to you, and what does it mean to you? And maybe for the first time, if we all are sitting at a dinner table in a way that we normally wouldn't, we could learn from each other. Because we don't have, like, as men, we operate in silos. We spend our lives trying to figure out what it means to be a man by looking in the mirror and looking at the men that we know. But we know that also doesn't always work. So it's important to step outside of our comfort zone. And one of the things we talk about in the show is that I believe part of being a man and part of being a human is learning to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. And I think that's really what our show is about, and that's what we're trying to do.
This may seem like a really dumb question because...
No dumb questions.
Well, hang on now. You see that? Well, no, I understand the entire point of the show, the entire environment that you sort of cultivated for this conversation to take place. Was there ever a moment, though, given to the thought of having a female perspective as a part of the conversation? And if that's been thought about...
the opposite of a dumb question. It's a great question. And we went back. We actually did focus groups before we started the show. And we wanted to we wanted to reclaim the phrase "man enough" to begin with, because at the end of the day, it's not a good word. It's not a good phrase. Being man enough, like, are you man up? We wanted to reclaim it and refocus it to make it a positive, to let people know that you are, whether man or woman, you are enough. But the issue that we're trying to tackle is that men don't talk to each other. Men talk to women. Right? If you are married, you talk to your wife. Yeah. Your wife said, hey, go be vulnerable with him. I do that with my wife. Thank God for my wife. I wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for my wife. And thank God for yours, right? And if
believe it.
And if you're in a same-sex marriage, you'll probably talk to your husband because that's who you feel comfortable with. But men have a hard time talking to each other because when we're vulnerable with men, we're afraid that in some cases, for many men, that we're giving up our power and the things and our vulnerability can be used against us. That's a scary place to be. We'll lose our standing. If he knows what I'm really dealing with, as Michael Kimmel says actually in the episode, then he could use that against me in the future. So it was important for us that we stayed true to the conversation at the dinner table and showed men talking to each other to hopefully give other men permission to do the same. However, in the show, we do step outside of it. And it is very important to have a female perspective. So as an example, in the sexual assault episode that's going to be released in a few weeks.
Can I ask when's that? Yeah, I saw it.
The first week of February.
First week of February.
We definitely have female perspective because we can't just be a group of men talking about sexual assault. And the majority of the show is produced and run by women. And that's intentional. So we have advisors, we have producers. It's very, very, very important for us that perspective is included in the conversation. So we sit down, and as an example, with Susan Bryson, who's an expert in the sexual assault, the philosophy of sexual assault. She teaches at Dartmouth, and her and I go really deep. She was raped, and she tells me all about it. and she talks about the psychology behind it. But we also have Tony Porter at the table, who's the founder of A Call to Men, who basically has spent the last 20 years teaching men how they can be allies to stop violence against women. And then we also are going to share 3 real Me Too stories that I think is important that men listen to. And again, the point of that whole episode is letting the men have a real honest conversation about what's happening, sharing some of their own stories of abuse, and then figuring out how we can become better allies. But that can't happen unless we bring women in. So it's a great question, and it's definitely something we thought about.
There's something else that you guys thought about that I do love, and you've said it a couple of times, which is that you hope the show demonstrates that this is something you can do, and it encourages people to go and have similar conversations. And I love that you take it one step further on the site. There's actually like a PDF, a guidebook. There's a handbook. You've made it as easy as it could possibly be for someone to do this very difficult thing. And the last question before we get ready to turn it over to the audience is how much of this vision was formed 3 years ago, and how much of it have you built over time, and where did the handbook come from? I think it's brilliant.
Well, thank you. Look, I can't take all the credit. We have an amazing team and company at Wayfair. So this was something that I was practicing and working on and doing. And one of the things that I constantly practice is, sometimes I dive into situations as a way to keep myself accountable. So I brought my dad onto the show so that my dad and I could have a forced but real conversation where there was no BS and go deep and vulnerable with each other. And it's the same thing with, the PDF that men can download if they want to have this. Like, we're starting to have more of these conversations in real life. And we wanted to say, look, this show is not just candy. Like, this is a real thing. This conversation can happen with 2 guys or with 6 guys or with 10 guys, and here's how you do it. So it's been a team effort. We've just constantly been trying to figure out how can we affect as many men and women as possible. Because if we really believe that if we can start to teach men and inspire men and give men permission and let them know that it's safe and that that there are men that are willing to talk and listen, and all of us are dealing with these problems that so many of us feel like we're doing and going through alone, then that can change an entire generation. Like, our children, our boys can change. We might not see the same issues that we're seeing with masculinity in 15 or 20 years if these conversations start happening now. So our real intention is disruptive inspiration. Let's make you uncomfortable enough so that you can be comfortable, And let's have these conversations so that our children don't have to.
Well, you're sowing very valuable seeds, and you're making it enabling and empowering other people to sow the same seeds. It's brilliant. I love this show, man. I got to tell you, I really do, and I'm very excited to see more of it. I know you said first week of February? Or?
Yeah, it looks like the first week of February we're going to be releasing the sexual assault and harassment episode.
Okay,
yeah.
And then and what do we have after that?
And then after that, we're going to be figuring out. We're going to be shooting 4 more.
4 more.
And,
okay.
And yeah, we're going to be working on that with our partners at Harry's and figure out what all of you guys want to hear men talk about.
What's the easiest way for people to find the show right now? Just go to the site.
You guys can go to wearemanenough.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook.
Very cool.
We Are Man Enough, and
we're going to turn. Oh, you know what? Sorry, don't get mad at me. One more question before we turn it over to the audience. How are things going on Jane the Virgin, man? How are things going on this show?
What has everybody seen so far? I'm trying to remember what the last thing that aired is, so I don't get fired.
Well, I'm gonna be very honest with you, right? So, my lovely wife again, she watched the whole show. She binged it through, and she's like, "My God, you've got to watch this show." I said, "All right, let's give it a shot." I got hooked. I'm only up to like middle of season 2, so if anyone's gonna ask anything after that, just give me a heads up so I get earmuffs. Because I am hooked, all right? But
you have some major anxiety coming your way.
I know. And I said already that it's nobody's fault but my own. I accept it if something gets spoiled, but just like if we go work together, if you can give me a heads up, I appreciate that sincerely. Because
that's possible with Jane the Virgin.
I don't think it is.
I think because every week's a spoiler.
Oh my God, it's incredible. I absolutely love it.
But just because you know what's happening doesn't mean you'll see it coming.
That's true. I did want to ask you, I saw a post that Gina Rodriguez put up maybe 6 days ago or so that she directed an episode, which is very exciting.
She did. We just wrapped her episode yesterday.
She directed you, I imagine.
She was a phenomenal director.
Yeah.
And she's so brilliant, and I'm so lucky to work with her. And she did a great job, and I'm directing my first episode in 3 weeks. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So we're doing it. We're both doing it this season. Yeah. She was incredible.
Very, very, very cool. All right. Yeah, I had to get that in. Sorry. I believe we do have audience questions. We're going to get to them right now. The first one's going to be right over here.
Hi.
Hi.
My first question is, were you hesitant at first to start Man Enough? If so, how did you overcome it?
Yeah. You know what's so funny is I feel like my life is constantly jumping into cold water. You know how if you're going to jump into cold water, you have this kind of anxiety because you know it's going to suck, right? And I feel like that a lot. I'm like, it's like if you've ever been skydiving and you're going up on the plane, you're like, why did I do this? But I think that's where the most growth happens, right? It's that pain that you know you're about to experience, and I wanted to do it, so I said, I'm doing it, right? The company got behind it, we decided to do it, and then right before we did it, I freaked out, which is generally what happens. And if you talk to my wife, she'll be like, oh yeah, he freaks out. And I come home and I'm like, oh my God, I don't think, baby, and I'm like pacing around and she's like, baby, breathe. I'm like, because I really do, I panic because at the end of the day, I'm still that kid in middle school and high school that was wanting to be liked. We all are. And it's just, high school just changes. Then it becomes college and it's the same thing. Then it becomes your coworkers, right? And your group of friends. And the one thing that I know is that it's very easy to fail in this business, especially when you're doing something on your own. So I had a bunch of fears. One of my fears was, is anybody going to want to be on the show? Am I going to get anybody even remotely interesting or famous? Or is everyone just going to reject me or think that I'm crazy? And it was really, it was a big challenge. And then it was like, well, is anyone going to watch it? And if they don't watch it, does that mean I failed? So all these things go through just like anyone else. It's all the same thing. The only difference is that this was me. So I had to really be mindful of making sure that the success or failure of this project didn't mean that I as a man or a human was a success or a failure. And that's my biggest thing, because I care so much, and I sometimes care too much. And I'm not one of these people that like pretends like they don't give a crap what people think. Like, I don't even read the comments. I made a pact to not read the comments on the TED Talk because I do care. I'll be real. Like if somebody Instagrams or tweets me a comment or is mean to me, it hurts me. Because I'm a human. I'm still, again, that kid in high school that if people were gossiping about me, it hurt my feelings. Yeah, I had a lot of fear about it. But I'll tell you, when you dive in and then you get acclimated and you start to get these messages from men that are just pouring their hearts out, it's just totally worth it. And I would, if we only made these 4 and 100 people watched it and 10 men emailed me and said the things that they've been saying, then it was totally worth it. Because those 10 men over the course of their lives are going to interact with millions and millions of people, and their children will. And you know what? 10 people, one person can change the world, let alone 10.
So what he's saying is, guys, the goal is 10 people. If we could each tell.
So if you guys
anything
each
above that
watch the show,
anything above that is bonus.
Then I can leave here feeling good.
Thank you for that awesome question. We have time for a few more. Next one's going to be, I believe, right here.
Hi guys, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler. I love Jane. Close your ears. I love Jane the Virgin, and I feel like this season we've seen Rafael kind of struggle with his own masculinity, and especially what it means to provide for your family. Do you think your work in the most recent episodes has influenced your work on Man Enough?
You know what's interesting is I think it's the other way around. I feel like there was a really powerful scene with Gina and I where Rafael hit rock bottom, and it was after he got hit by a car. It's a telenovela. It's a telenovela.
Yeah, it's fine.
So it's either getting hit by a car or going down an elevator shaft.
Yeah, it was one or the other. I know.
And he had this really vulnerable moment with her where for the first time in 3-4 seasons, you got to see no layer. Like the layers were just completely shed, and he was raw, and he broke down. And it was really reflective of kind of where I've been in my life. So I think that this journey I've been on as a man has really helped me find a new depth to Rafael, and fall more in love with him, because that's what he's learning. I mean, he's literally on the same journey that I am now, and I'm sure for the writers it's not an accident because they're brilliant. Our writers, Jenny Erman is a brilliant show creator, but he's literally learning what it means to be a man, and for the first time he's also learning from women, because he didn't have any women in his life, really. So it's I think they're both informing each other, and there's no coincidences. It's just he's a great character to play.
One of the things that I think we're all hooked. The writing on the show is incredible. So good. I'm wondering, do you just kind of step back and let them do their thing, or do they at sometimes come to you and say, "Hey, what do you think about, or do you have any ideas or anything like that?"
They don't need me.
They don't need. Yeah.
They are brilliant, capable writers, and the show is run by amazing feminist that really has her pulse on every. Yeah, they don't need any advice or mansplaining from me at all.
Amazing. All right, we have time for, I believe, one more question. It looks like it's coming from right here.
Hi, I'm Myra. You talked about Jane the Virgin. You talked about being a DJ. What's next? Like, I see you as Broadway, as Aladdin, because you look like, yeah.
Well, I can tell you my wife would not dream that on anybody because I cannot sing at all. I cannot sing at all. Honestly, what's next is we're going to be making more Men Enough, and I'll be directing my first feature film at a studio actually this year that we'll be announcing very soon, which is really exciting. I'm really excited to have a directing career, and yeah, so that's really what's next. And then of course Jane the Virgin and Man Enough, and we're still making My Last Days. And then the final thing I'll say is I have a foundation, and in actually a few weeks I put on a carnival every year. The Skid Row Carnival of Love. Skid Row has one of the largest homeless populations in the country, and it's right next to multi-million-dollar condos. And so every year we throw a massive carnival for all of those experiencing homelessness through my foundation, the Wayfair Foundation. So that's really exciting. January 27th in LA, and we're hoping to take that carnival and take it around the country, and any place that has an endemic homeless population. And the day is all about love and service and joy, and having a community come together, and through love and the gift of vision, allowing these amazing people to be seen and to be heard and to be loved, and hoping to get them on their feet that way, not just through legislation or policy.
It's pretty amazing. It's the 4th year that you guys have done this, right?
This is the 4th year. Yeah, this will be the 4th year. We're shutting down 2 blocks of Skid Row, and we're going to have probably 1,500 to 2,000 volunteers come down, and we're going to hope to get people off the street and dance and eat and party and get people signed up to the DMV, and
that's what it's all about, man.
That's what it's all about.
All right, we're going to wrap it up. I want to ask you one final parting question. This whole thing, it's been a journey for you. You're still on this journey. You're actively participating in this journey.
We'll always be on this journey.
You've had these conversations. Was there a standout moment, a lesson, a key learning that you pulled away from this experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. And it's right here. When I was sitting down with Susan Bryson, which you'll see in episode 4, it really hit me. And I think this is a human thing, but I think that men could really use this and need this more than anybody, and that is to listen. I just don't think we've been taught to listen. And I know I wasn't. I think we've been taught to speak so that people hear us, and to use our loud voices. But I don't think we've been taught to use our loud voices to amplify women and to amplify the voices of those that haven't been heard. So listening has, I think, been the thing that I'm taking away the most from this journey. But listening to the point where you actually hear. Because it's easy to listen. It's harder to hear. And when you hear something, you can't unhear it. So that's really, in the light of the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement and everything I'm learning about the ways that I have failed women and men throughout my life, I can't correct anything if I don't listen.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for this amazing show. Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to thank our audience for their amazing questions and being an amazing audience. And I want everybody to join me in thanking Justin Baldoni for being here with us one more time.
Bring it in, baby.
Oh, bring it in. Oh, my God. So good. Thank you.